Hello, everybody. Welcome to my second Pandemic Experiences interview. Today I'm speaking with Michelle. I'll put her TikTok link below. She has 20,000 followers and she talks a lot about the process of grief that we've all been through during the pandemic and how this whole experience has kind of derailed our lives a little bit. That's mainly what her content is about on TikTok, and that is basically the main focus of our discussion today. Um, I think a lot of you will get something out of this interview. Actually, it's very interesting, and the empathy and compassion with which Michelle discusses these issues is definitely very insightful. And yeah, so let me know what you guys think of the interview. Place a comment below, like the video, etc. And look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.
Just before we get into it, then, is there any social media account or businesses or anything you want to plug?
Yes, actually. So my TikTok account, I don't have a lot of followers, but it's DeGarmo Michelle. I was not very creative with naming myself.
Yeah. So I'll put the links in the description below as well for people.
Thank you.
But I have to say it's been a really interesting TikTok to follow. With a lot of my past experience being in mental health, I just find it really interesting that it's the first time I've heard somebody talk about the pandemic in terms of grief. A life lost and a life changed. Yeah, I just find it really interesting. I really enjoyed the content. So I think you should have more followers because it's really compelling
Thank you.
stuff, very thoughtful. So yeah. Yeah. So what do you think then is most different in your life now than it was in January 2020?
Well, so there's the obvious answer that like I have to do an airflow calculation before walking into a building to decide whether or not I feel safe.
Mm.
And then like there are elderly family members I haven't seen in 2 years. I have family members abroad that I haven't seen in 2 years. I don't know if I will see them in the near future. So, that's been hard. I was supposed to go back to Germany for work in May of 2020. Obviously, that didn't happen. And I've, continued that working relationship with my German colleagues remotely, but I do miss the experience of going back to Wiesbaden and being able to work in person with these wonderful people who, like, again, I don't know if I'm ever going to see them again. That's been a hard adjustment for me, is the idea that, like, we have to take rapid tests before visiting our parents. Just a lot of things are structurally different. And also there's the going into a public space and like, is somebody not wearing a mask? Is someone wearing a mask? Is it a political statement? Or are they just doing what they think is right? Like
Sure.
There's a weird adversarial aspect to everything now. Like, I know you said no politics, and I'm not like going down.
Oh no, you could discuss politics. Sorry, yeah, I think I need to make that more clear in my introduction to these things.
Oh, like you have no political.
Yeah. So like this isn't.
I get it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you could discuss it, and I'll discuss it with you. You can ask for my views if you want, but it won't be coming from me if that's yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
That's
all
okay.
Right. So yeah. So that part's kind of changed. Like one of the personal anxieties I have is sometimes walking into a public space, and if I see people without masks, I don't necessarily feel frightened or upset, but I wonder if they will have a reaction to me wanting to wear a mask. And I feel sometimes like I want to be able to say to people, like, I'm wearing a mask because I work with vulnerable populations and I'm trying to be respectful, or I just want to follow the rules, or I whatever. And I no one's ever challenged me, no one's ever said anything to me about it, but I definitely have that kind of anxiety in my head. And then for me personally, one of the things that's really different now is the feeling like I can't necessarily trust anymore that my life is going to have any kind of continuity. Like, I know in general, we were always a car accident or a diagnosis away from tragedy, but we just kind of carry that around with us, and we don't really think about it because culturally we don't focus on all the bad stuff that could happen. And I feel like now my whole mindset is like, I could be enjoying, coffee with a friend and then think, well, this is really nice. It
Yeah.
might be the last time. So
Yeah.
there's like that kind of power over everything.
Yeah, because it seems a bit of a lottery, at least from the kind of the data I've looked at personally, is that even though the mortality rate is really low for young people, um, it seems a lottery of who it's going to hit hard and who it's going to hit fatally. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to the when it gets a younger person, you know,
Right.
which
And
makes
that
it
part's
more
really
uncertain.
scary.
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying yeah, you work over in Germany quite a lot. How often were you going back and forth to Germany before?
Well, I have a short contracts. I own an environmental consulting firm. So I had a short DoD contract in October of 2018, and I was supposed to go back in May of 2020.
Mm,
And I had been the plan was to go back every 15, 18 months,
mm,
as long as this op order continued, and it just
mm,
stopped. And so I remember like right before, I'm in New York State, right before the state shut down, New York locked down hard
mm.
on March 16th. And nothing was open. It was 96 days from when the governor shut the state until we started to be able to go back to work again. And I have that count to try to help me keep perspective. And sometimes it's like, it was only 96 days. Like, it's
Yeah.
okay. And sometimes it's like, oh God, it was 96 days. But right before our state lockdown, I went to one of the last Broadway shows with my son. And I remember being on the train, and I had my German app, and I'm learning conversational German so I can do a little bit better,
Yeah,
next time than I did in 2018. And I'm still taking those German lessons. Like, I still hope I get to go back.
yeah, yeah.
But I'm working for a US Army base, so I don't need to know German to do my job remotely,
Mm.
but I just still kind of have that hope.
Yeah, so that if you get to go there, you can actually interact with people in the local area, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it was very short-lived the first time, but
Mm,
that's one of the things I've kind of had to let go and reframe my perspective on, is this idea that I would, I had a relationship with the woman I rented an apartment from,
mm.
and she and I had stayed connected, and I
Cool.
kind of got to know this neighborhood, even though I was only there for a short while, with the idea that I would keep coming back.
Yeah.
And now I just don't know if it's going to happen, and it's something that I was really excited about.
Mm.
But it feels disingenuous to give that much energy to such a minor disappointment in the grand scheme of things. There's so many
Well,
scary things happening in the world.
I don't think
But
it is a minor disappointment, really. I think this is because it's affected a lot more in your life than just the fact that you want to go to Germany. It's going to affect everything around that. This is because everything in your life is interconnected. And yeah, I mean, like you're saying before we started about, if it's not all death and destruction, how do you kind of validate your own feelings about the grief of having your life changed? And thinking that it is valid what I'm going through, and it completely is, because one thing that humans don't like is going into the unknown and not knowing what to expect in the immediate future.
right.
We all make plans, don't we? And yeah. So have you had to kind of try and access health and social services or anything like that through the pandemic? Or and if yeah.
We did. Well, so I have a son with epilepsy.
Hmm.
Switching to remote care for him was a hard transition.
Yeah.
Um, and I just something simple like having a sinus infection. They weren't going to let me go to a medical office when I had COVID symptoms, even though I knew what it was. This happens to me all the time. But I've tried to access different levels of healthcare and had to figure out how to have those kind of appointments remotely, like therapy. Remote therapy seems really normal to me now. It was not. It was very awkward in 2020.
Yeah.
And my father had to live with very limited eyesight for almost 2 years because all the his cataract surgery was an elective surgery. So, I can't imagine, being in lockdown and you can't really see the TV and you can't really read a book.
Yeah.
That was particularly awful for him. So it wasn't my personal experience, but I know it was really hard for my dad to have to put off, getting his eyesight back. And like his life wasn't in danger, but it was still a huge quality of life issue.
And I do think that is something that's been massively overlooked, is the quality of life stuff, because it has big implications for how your life's going to be through the pandemic and afterwards, and what kind of mental health issues you might develop because of it. Certainly with cataract surgery, I think it's an elective surgery in the UK as well, and I just don't understand why it's necessary. It's not elective, surely.
Right. It's so quick and it's so easy, and then you can have all your eyesight back and it's fine. It should be.
And having to wait 2 years, so how often were you seeing your family before the pandemic?
Probably about once a week.
Wow.
We lived close to my parents, and we would go in and just pop in and say hello. Or my daughter got married during the pandemic. She didn't get to have a wedding, and got married by our town clerk outside. So things like that were hard. We had porch visits. I remember for like Easter, we got all dressed up and we made big signs, and we went to stand outside my parents' window and in our Sunday dresses and held up our sign. And we all through the summer had porch visits. They had this big enclosed, like screened in porch, and so they would open the sliding door just a little bit between us and them, and so we got to see them and check on them. And I was grocery shopping for them and dropping the food off in like a tote outside so that they didn't have to go out. And so we did still see them, but it was almost 2 years before I got to go into my parents' house again. It was very weird.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you've had them your whole life.
Yeah. And my sister, I didn't see my sister for over a year. She had just moved back from the West Coast. And then she's 3 hours away, and we didn't see each other. And we have family up in Canada who we would see probably 2 or 3 times a year, and we kind of took for granted, like, oh, it's Christmas time, Aunt Maura and Uncle Dan are coming. And just to go so long without seeing these people that we grew up with and who were just such a big part of our lives, and they it seems really weird now to have reframed that relationship into Zoom calls and emails.
And even if someone's an introvert or an extrovert, we're still social animals. We're still social creatures that need this contact with people, and have a variety of contacts. It's very difficult for people. Did you have any sports and hobbies that you had to change in the way you accessed them?
Actually, my husband does comic-cons, so like comic book shows.
Oh, cool.
And we're also members of the Society for Creative Anachronism. So, we used to go to these. It's hard to explain if you don't know what it is, but it's like cosplay, but we
cool.
with a historical aspect.
Oh, nice.
So we would, do some historical reenactment of like the Viking era. And we had a huge group of people that we did this with. And, it's not really, even outside, it's such a big gathering of people. It's not really totally safe to do anymore. So we haven't, there are people who we are not super close with. It's not like we, we're pursuing Zoom relationships with them, but we have hung out with them, every summer for years and years. So that hobby just kind of dropped off because it wasn't an integral part of, not our core family, not how we make money. And my husband hasn't been able to go to a Comic-Con in 2 years, and that was a big family thing that we had, going and renting the hotel and helping him with the show. And
oh, so he was one of the sellers?
He's one of the sellers. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. That's quite a nice little hobby to have, that.
It is. And the
Yeah.
kids all, grew up going to these Comic Cons. And it was just a really neat thing we did as a family. And
Yeah.
we don't really do that anymore. They don't really hold them anymore.
It's one of the things that I really like about Americans. I'm super generalizing here, but it's just the way that you guys are so focused on the family unit, and you do things like that together. And certainly from my personal experience in Britain, we don't have that same sort of culture of that togetherness that Americans have. And I was watching like John Krasinski did this thing on YouTube to sort of help get people through the pandemic. He did like good news, and like every week he'd do like a short funny little news report about all the good things that are happening in America and Canada. And there was just all these really sweet things, you're saying, like with the porch parties and things like that. And I didn't see anything like that over here. Like, it's just, I just love the way that you guys respond to a crisis like that and try and make the best of it. I don't know, it really puts your culture in a good light, I think. But,
Oh, well,
yeah.
something should. We're
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
We're not doing great right now in terms of optics, I don't think.
Yeah. I think it's because people definitely get like a false perspective, mainly just because of the news.
Right.
Yeah. And
We are.
yeah, you're just such a diverse culture, like everyone else. I mean, you got 50 different cultures in 50 different states, for one thing.
Right. Oh, I totally think New York State, and I'm way upstate. I'm much closer to Canada than I am New York City. But we're up in the mountains. Our culture is very different from like the downstate regions. It's totally different from the Buffalo region that's kind of out in Western New York. And then we are so different from like Louisiana. Like I've worked in New Orleans,
Cool.
again, on these little small jobs. And like to spend, a couple weeks or a month in New Orleans is a little bit of culture shock, even though I'm in my own country still. So
Yeah.
it's very, we could be 50 different countries.
Yeah.
I don't know. Although I think like New York and New England could like meld together and create a country. But,
yeah, I do love the look of the Northeast. I've never been there, but I just love the kind of the rural aspect to some of it and the nice little cities you've got up there. But yeah, yeah, I'm digressing now.
it's okay. We can edit this part out.
Yeah. Oh, I think I'll probably keep it in anyway, just because it's nice for people to see that in an interview. It's not all like really intense conversation kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so so I think it's quite good just to kind of see how people's understandings changed through the pandemic about pandemics and viruses. So obviously none of these questions are trying to catch you out. It's just about your personal view of it all and what your understanding has been as the pandemic's progressed. So what kind of understanding do you think you had about viruses and pandemics before 2020?
Oh gosh, almost none. Like really, I had very, very little background on any of this. I'm an environmental professional, and I can tell you, how asbestos moves when it's disturbed, or like how the plume will move if the underground storage tank is disturbed or whatever. But I had no background on this kind of science, and so I think the one maybe little edge that I had going into this is I knew how a properly cited source was supposed to look. So like I knew what real science looked like. And I think it was maybe because of that, even though my science has nothing to do with virology or epidemiology, I knew what a peer-reviewed paper looked like, and I knew what a properly organized metric looked like. And so as I started to try to read the medical journals, and I started to follow like like Dr. Cat and Laughter and Light, some of the big TikTok creators, I could sort of follow along when they started to talk about like, here's why the metric is wrong and here's how data can lie to you. And so I knew almost nothing about viruses and whatever, but I could kind of tell when I was being lied to.
Which happened a lot, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Even inadvertently. I mean, I really believe that like I think that some of our leadership, at least locally, did the best that they could.
Yeah.
You know, he ended up not being a good human in the end, but I'm glad Governor Cuomo was my governor. I'm
Oh yeah.
grateful that I lived in New York. I think he was one of the local leaders who tried to use science to make his decisions. I don't like all of his decisions. And it turns out maybe he's not a good person, but
Yeah.
but like I think that he was honestly concerned about our well-being as a group of citizens. Do you know what I mean? Not like,
yeah, because I think it's definitely unfortunate timing, and I think in politics they kind of weaponize these things, ready to deploy them as at the worst time. And
right.
it's I had mixed opinions about the individual things that he was doing through the pandemic, but some stuff was good, some stuff was a bit dodge, but I thought he might know something I don't, so kind of gave the benefit of the doubt. And I think with the bad stuff that happened, it has nothing to do with his handling of the pandemic, kind of thing.
Right. And I have to separate those things. Like
Yeah,
I've often I don't like his economic development policies. I don't like his handling of a lot of things in our state, you know, but like I think this is one of the things that he did well. I'm very, you know, we have family in Florida and, you know, out in Texas. I'm really grateful that I lived in New York during the pandemic. Like our you know, our family members in like Texas and North Carolina and Florida did not get the same level of scientific consideration that I think we got here.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think
not to call out specific states, that's rude, right? But
no,
like,
not really. Because I mean, you guys are living there, and there's a lot of comparisons going on. And this is just about your individual perspective. You know, this is how you've seen the pandemic and what you've personally been through. So I think these points are valid. And I noticed that, well, one of the things in our country, in the UK, is that, and I think this is what happened in the states you were just talking about, is that they were making these decisions politically, and it was nothing to do with the data. And
right, yeah, that's very much the feeling that I got, and it happened in New York too, of course, you know, and it still is. But yeah, I think everyone was very concerned about the economy, and like I was too. I'm a small business owner. I didn't know if we would survive this as a company. But I also felt like some of the other countries where I have friends and colleagues, maybe the perspective was a little bit less about the economy and a little bit more about like, let's protect our people. And I have an interesting story about that, if you don't mind me kind of
totally go for it
off script for a minute.
No, that's fine.
So we were still trying to plan this work that I was going to do, you know, with the Wiesbaden garrison, and so I would be in these meetings with these civilian contractors from the different European command bases, and so I had like a gentleman from England, a gentleman from you know, lots of people from Germany, someone from Ireland. Anyway, like these other European countries, we'd all get together in these Zoom meetings to try to organize this work, right? And they would ask like, how are you? How's your lockdown going? How's your family? How's your whatever? I was the only one that got asked if I was safe. And that really resonated with me, because like Germany wasn't asking France, are you safe? But everyone kind of checked in with me, like, how are you doing? Are you safe? And I felt like, wow, this is really shining some new light on how maybe Americans are seen in the rest of the world. You know, in my very limited experience with a handful of, you know, European countries where I'm working with their US Army bases, but still, I feel like the sentiment for me was a little bit more like, I don't know, like, how's your fascism and your gun violence going?
It's a very interesting choice of words, isn't it? Are you safe? Like, because there's a load of different words they could have used, but they specifically chose that. It's This says something about how the news is perceived over here anyway, I think.
I
Yeah.
never really thought of it exactly like that before
No.
until, but yeah, I think that, and I think it was unconscious. I think just maybe the perception, or maybe the perception that I'm from New York and they were thinking I was in New York City, and New York City wasn't doing particularly well in the beginning of the pandemic. But I would say, no, I'm way upstate. Like, we're practically Canadian. It's fine.
Honorary Canadians.
Right.
Yeah, so with the lockdowns, obviously they affect everybody in different ways psychologically. And, this is going to depend on different things like your socioeconomic status, your demographic characteristics, your personality. So I was just wondering how you and your immediate family coped with that, particularly like you were saying, in the first 96 days.
Well, at first it was such a shock because it seemed to unfold kind of slowly at first and then all at once. We went from, like I mentioned before, like we were at this Broadway show and no one was wearing a mask and it was fine. And there was kind of rumblings in the end of February, the beginning of March, that like a thing is happening and maybe we should be concerned, but I don't know. And it kind of had that like we all remembered like the bird flu and the swine flu, and it never really turned into a thing that affected us here in the US. And so I think that's kind of how our perception was at first. And like, I remember I had on the Friday before the governor shut down the state, I'd had a staff meeting with my company, and we're really small. There's only 8 of us, and I'd had this group meeting and said, okay, so our indicator to go full remote is going to be when they close the schools, and we're issuing everybody a laptop, and really try to start thinking about what your job is going to look like if you have to stay home for a few weeks. And we thought we had a good plan in place. Like, we thought we had a really comprehensive cycling through keeping half as many people in the office at the same time, and who has kids, who has elderly people they're caring for. And we really tried to think about these things. And we went home that Friday thinking we're being incredibly progressive. We're being incredibly proactive. And we were looking at the data coming out of like Israel and, and China, and thinking we know what we're talking about. And we're looking at Italy as like that, the canary in the coal mine, as everyone had started to say at this time, like whatever's happening in Italy it's coming. And so that weekend we had sort of started to think like, this looks like a thing. It maybe isn't as scary as the media is making it out to be. It's probably fine. Over the weekend, in the course of that 48 hours, all the schools closed, just one right after the other. And I remember getting my husband works at the school district, and our local like central school district is called BOCES. And so the BOCES emails were going out. Skylive is closed, Greenwich is closed, Glens Falls is closed, just one right after the other, all the schools in our area. And he's getting all of these, he was union president at the time, and he's getting these messages from the people in the union, like, well, what are we doing? Or are we furloughed? Are we gonna have our jobs? What about our health insurance? Like, and he doesn't have any answers. Nobody has any answers. And my staff started calling me like, what are we doing? What's going on? And so we all went back to work that Monday morning and started like gathering our things. But at the time, our governor was saying 2 weeks to flatten the curve, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And so we all went home thinking like, it's going to be 2 weeks, it's going to be fine. Well, at the beginning of the day, we thought we knew what was going on. And by noon, the state offices were closing. And by 4 o'clock, the state was closed. And we all walked out of there just like in shock.
Yeah.
None of the plans we made 48 hours before mattered.
Yeah.
And none of the plans we made at 8 o'clock in the morning mattered. And none of the plans we made at noon mattered. And it felt so overwhelming. And I remember one of the last things that I did is I put on REM's It's the End of the World as We Know It. And I walked into my business partner's office and I slapped my phone down on his desk, and I just sat there, and we just sat there in silence and listened to the song, and we were like, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, totally. And it's so intimidating when those things start happening, because you don't know anything about the virus. You don't know anything about what is the mortality rate, how do people get infected. Nobody knew the answers to these questions. Yeah, then things start closing down.
We had, we had one staff member who left in tears and didn't want to stand near any of us, and like immediately got in her car and drove to her mother's house and lived in an RV.
Wow.
For the lockdown, because she was afraid to be in touch with any other person. She was so afraid of not knowing how the virus spread or what it did or what it was. And we had, and my business partner left the same day saying, it's all right, you don't need, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine, don't overreact, this is fine. And that ended up, from a mental health perspective, that I think ended up kind of throwing me off base more than anything else. I accepted that this was all unfolding very quickly and nobody really knew what was going on. But the other person I was running my company with, it took him a lot longer to get to the place where I was looking at this and thinking, this doesn't look good, and I don't think it's just going to be 2 weeks. And I remember saying something like, should we pack up the fridge, should we like bring home the plants, and he was very kind of patronizing, like no, you're overreacting, it's fine, like don't calm down, it's
don't
fine,
worry your little
react, it's fine. And like a month later, I'm back to collect the half dead plants and scrape the food out of the fridge. And there was and the other story that I have is that my kids, my oldest daughter is a special education teacher.
Okay.
And she sat us down within the first week. She sat us all down with these big sheets of paper, and she gave us all markers, and she said, we're going to write down our daily schedule. We need to have a schedule. And so she helped my younger son and I write, like, we're going to wake up in the morning at the same time, even if there's no work to do, even if there's no school, we're going to wake up, we're going to get dressed, we're going to shower, we're going to eat breakfast. And then we scheduled our days, go for a walk, play with the dog, check in with our colleagues or our work friends. And everything was very scheduled. And I'm really grateful that she did that for us, because I think she recognized that when we were in this state of uncertainty or this state of panic, that a rigid schedule would be comforting.
Yeah, that's actually such a good idea. That's an incredibly good coping strategy, actually. My partner kind of like structures a day very similarly, and it definitely helped me kind of go through that day to day kind of thing, knowing that I was going to wake up the same time every day and I wasn't going to sleep in and lose my circadian rhythm or anything. I think that's
I think it would have been really easy when we were so scared and upset and uncertain. It would have been so easy for me to stay in my PJs and watch, all the episode of Gilmore Girls, but like we rewatched The Office a few times, but it helped. It helped to know that the dog was counting on me to be awake. In the absence of my colleagues needing me to show up and be a good boss, my dog needed me to be a good companion.
I think that's going to be a common theme for people is the whole pet thing. I think that's going to be something. And how many animals do you have? Is just the dog?
We had 3 cats at the beginning of the pandemic, and then we ended up with 5. My son is 17 now. He was 15 at the beginning of the pandemic, and a friend of ours had found a mama cat in her barn, and these kittens, and it put something out on Facebook about like, who wants a kitten? I gotta find a home for these. And we were not looking to be a family with 5 cats, but our son really, really wanted a pair of kittens. And so we said, you know what, it's fine. Everyone's adopting new animals now. So, and they're great. They're the best cats. We're really happy that we had them. And he seriously bonded with these cats. Like, not that we didn't like the animals that we had before, but spending all day, every day with these animals, I think we really felt a different kind of connection. And I know, like, for me, my connection with my dog was very different when he was the whole point of me getting out of bed sometimes. Like, my kids are older, they didn't really need me. Like, they can get out of bed and get themselves a Pop-Tart, and they didn't really need me for anything.
Yeah.
But like, I felt very baseless and lost
Yeah.
without a staff to lead,
Yeah.
and without projects with deadlines.
Mm.
So like the dog kind of became my project.
Well, because it does sound like, now that we're sort of building a picture of what your life was like before and after, it does sound like you had quite a high level job with a lot of responsibility, having people relying on you every day. And I was wondering how your ideas about grief come into that, because obviously people usually think of grief in terms of death, but really people need to be more in tune with what grief is, because I think, you know, your TikTok things are perfectly spot on, that grief is a process that happens with everything. And yeah, so I can't remember where I was going with that. But yeah, I have to think about it again a second, because I've lost my place.
That's okay. I have stuff to say about that.
Yeah.
And then please elaborate, you know, if you have other questions.
That's cool.
So what my volunteer work is as an end of life doula, and it's kind of like a hospice volunteer, but we, you know, I did a specialized education course, and like a birth doula is someone who is there to support the mother and the baby and the family through the transition of pregnancy and labor and the days after the birth, and the transition of becoming a new mother. Well, this is very much what a death doula does. You know, we walk with you, or accompany you through the transition of being a dying person, the act of dying, and being there to help with the grief processing of the people. So there are death doulas who work only with the dying person. There are death doulas who work with the entire family of, you know, loved ones and friends, friends and family. And you know, there's a lot of professional death doulas on TikTok, so I want to be really careful to say, like, this is the thing that I do as a volunteer. I don't do it often. I don't do it for money. But I am feeling like my end of life doula training and my hospice training has really resonated with my thoughts and feelings about the pandemic, because the common thread I'm seeing is that we are experiencing this collective grief. And grief is messy. Sometimes it makes people lash out in anger. Sometimes it makes us curl up in a little ball and not know what to do with ourselves. And I think grief, the best analogy I've ever heard about grief is it's like rocks in a backpack, you know, and you don't ever get to put this backpack down. You're going to carry it around for the rest of your life when you've experienced a loss, but you can take rocks out of the backpack. It can get lighter. So you know, kind of learn to shoulder it a little better as you live with it longer. So I think that's very much like my personal pandemic experience and what I'm hearing from the other people in my life. We lost the person that we thought we were going to get to be before this event. So my my pre-pandemic self was going to live part-time in Germany. Maybe it was only going to be a month, you know, every 15 or 18 months, but it was still a part of me that I valued, that I had to let go of and reframe that vision of myself and my future. You know, I was a person that traveled a lot for work. I haven't traveled farther than the next town over in 2 years. You know, I really miss the more fearless version of myself, who didn't leave the house every day thinking I might encounter a virus that could either end my life or make me disabled, or I could become a vector for somebody else's death or disability. Like it's so much. It feels like so much now that we're carrying around with us. And it reminds me of grief in that we can't set it down. We have to just learn to live with it. And it's a lot to process. And I think there's actual chemical changes that are happening in our bodies. And again, this is not my scientific background, but I know that the stress hormones that are continually activated as we are dealing with this, not just at the beginning of the lockdown, but all throughout the pandemic. There's just been this long emergency. So like a friend of mine who's a psychologist was telling me it's like our amygdalas, which is like our fear, the fear sensing part of our brain, is just like, there's a leopard in the tall grass. There might be a leopard in the tall grass, there might not be, but our, you know, our lizard brains are saying danger, 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 very much like they do when we lose a loved one, very much like, you know, there's similar chemical processes that happen when we've experienced this really deep, heavy loss. And it changes your brain chemistry, sometimes temporarily, but we have to learn how to live with our neuropathways working a little bit differently than what we're used to. And that's stressful in and of itself. So
and all of the new learned behaviors as well that have come out of the pandemic. I mean, so we've been doing it, like we've been going through all this for 2 whole years. It's going to be very hard to readjust our brain chemistry and readjust you know, unlearn these learned behaviors. They're going to be very maladaptive going forward. That you know, all this fear they've got. I kind of, for me, it kind of feels like we've been on a war footing almost. That, you know, where you're not allowed to counter a narrative. That's something that happened in World War II. That like if you said something that was just not in what you're allowed to say, then you would kind of lose everything, and people would think that, you know, you support the Germans or something. But and I think having this grief component in it kind of is helping me to kind of reframe my thoughts about it a bit, actually, because it's not something I'd considered before. And it's definitely building a bigger picture for me on just how damaging the last 2 years have been for people, and how difficult it's going to be coming out of it now over the next 2 years, you know, and trying to emerge from it. It's interesting. So what sort of concerns or worries do you have going forward now? Like, obviously, as governments are deciding the pandemic kind of doesn't exist anymore all of a sudden. And so what are your concerns and worries going forward?
Well, I'm very concerned for medical professionals who are now, by and large, having to deal with people who think the pandemic is not real, but are still seeking the medical professionals. Like we have friends who are in the medical community who are seeing people who are on their deathbeds saying, I don't have COVID, stop lying to me. That's, there seems to be a lot of burnout among medical professionals. One of my worries kind of long term is that we're going to see fewer people are going to want to be nurses, fewer people are going to want to be hospital workers and doctors. So, you know, in 20 years, are we going to have an overabundance of like dermatologists and no ER doctors? Like, you know, and that's an oversimplification, but I do think that there's a lot of burnout in the helping professions. And, you know, I think it's for our own mental health, like collectively as a community, it's difficult because no matter what you believe, about half the population really vehemently believes something completely contrary to what you think. And that has to be really hard for everybody. Like, regardless of your personal or political beliefs, or whether or not you think masks work, or whether or not you like the government, to have such a huge divide in whether or not the thing that's affecting all of us is real. That's really hard. And from a grief perspective, that's like encountering somebody and wanting to talk about your dead person and having the other person say, I don't really think they died.
They're still here.
So
that's a really good point, actually, because you know, you would have thought at the very least that we could all agree that this is happening, and that should be the common ground, and then our differences are just going to be on how to get out of it, you know, how to move forward. I wasn't surprised that there was kind of people denying that the existence of it all, Like 'cause there's always someone. I think I was just a bit surprised by the level of it and the numbers behind it and how many people there were, you know.
Mhm.
I think that is definitely what took me by surprise. um yeah, so what's your perception of how dangerous the virus is, I guess? Like, and then this is about you as an individual. How much threat do you think
Mhm.
the virus poses to you and your family?
Um, well, so we're all fully vaccinated. We have our booster shots. I've actually had COVID twice now. My son's had COVID twice.
Yeah.
The second time it was barely a blip on the radar.
Mm,
The first time, there were no vaccinations. I have asthma, and my
mm,
asthma actually did get significantly worse after having
mm.
COVID. Like I think my lungs are never going to be the same as they were before, but
Yeah.
it's not in a debilitating kind of way. It's like I got to take an inhaler every day now. So I
Mm,
feel like I got off really easy.
mm,
So I personally don't feel like I'm at a terrible disadvantage. And because my kids are older,
mm.
and my husband and I are relatively, young and healthy, I was never really concerned for myself. I mean, in the very
Mm.
beginning, yes, when they were saying that people with lung conditions are going to, die alone and on a ventilator, that was terrifying.
Yeah. Totally.
Um, but as the vaccines came out, and it seems like even with the variants, the vaccine efficacy seems to be holding up.
Mm,
Right now, I feel pretty secure that I've done everything I can to protect myself. I will still wear masks in public housing and,
yeah.
very crowded places, but I wouldn't wear one to an outdoor barbecue.
Yeah.
So I think um, my perception of fear has changed over time. And as we've learned more about how the virus works and how viral loads work and how it moves and
Mhm.
how it spreads, um, I worry a lot more for like my parents. I have a older father with a heart condition.
Yeah.
I'm always very concerned that like trying to maintain a relationship with my family
Mm,
could be hurting them, because the nature of my job is, even if I'm not traveling far distances,
yeah.
I see a lot of people. I go into a lot of places. I meet, dozens of
Mm,
new people every day while I'm out doing my job. And I constantly have to be in groups of people, no matter how much I try to protect myself.
yeah.
So I worry about being like an asymptomatic carrier and infecting somebody who is elderly or
Mm,
immune suppressed or whatever.
yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to accidentally hurt anybody else.
Yeah.
Um, and I have to continue to do the things that make the money. Like remote
Yeah.
work is not 100% um, doable right now.
For
We
sure.
do things that require us to be physically present to collect samples or collect data. And I worry about being a person who has to constantly go back and forth between the two worlds. I'm
Mm,
working with some immune compromised people, and then I'm going home to my family.
yeah. 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 Because and there's certainly been around so many immunocompromised people. That's like you say, they're basically a vector, aren't they? That if anything's floating around, they'll catch it, and then you're probably going to catch it from them, and then take it back home. Yeah, that's quite stressful. Um, in terms of how the media and governments have been sort of feeding information to the public, um, is are there any significant parts of the pandemic where you either felt informed or very poorly informed by the media and the government?
So I I feel like on a national level, we were vastly uninformed.
Mm,
I did not feel like the federal government did anything that mattered.
yeah.
um, that's just me personally. I know there's a lot of people who would disagree with me, but I felt like we were fed a lot of political rhetoric and told for too long that something that was actually quite serious was not serious at all.
Mm,
On the more local level, I know, our local elected officials tried very hard to make sure that we had an accurate count of how many people were infected, tested, hospitalized, what our death count was, so that we kind of knew, what does my town look like? What does my county look like? Our town supervisor still posts on Facebook every day how our town is doing in terms of numbers, how our county is doing, what the local hospital looks like. And that carried on throughout. And I do feel like our governor, for all of his many faults, did a really excellent job with the daily check-ins. That became a real touch point for us, is listening to Governor Cuomo tell us, here's what day it is, here's the new science, here's what the CDC says, here's what the New York State Department of Health says, and here's what I'm trying to figure out right now. And I appreciated that he admitted when he didn't know something.
Yeah.
That made me feel safe. So yeah, I think it varied a lot depending on the source.
Because I mean, that's such a rarity for a politician as well, to admit, like, well, I don't know this, I need to learn more first, or we need more data. It's just such a rarity to hear somebody say that in politics. It needs to happen more often.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, so is there anything that you took for granted before the pandemic that you don't take for granted anymore? I mean, I imagine the list is rather long.
I mean, all the normal stuff, right? But like concerts and going out to dinner and things like that. But I think, not to make it too heavy, but like hope. Like I took hope for granted. I generally believed that tomorrow was going to happen, and that hope for the future was a rational response to most things. And I struggle with that now. That's part of my own mental health that has changed, maybe inextricably, maybe not. But I struggle with whether or not tomorrow is going to happen. Like, making plans in the future, booking work 3-4 weeks out now feels like an incredible act of faith.
Yeah.
Because we just don't know. We haven't gone back down into lockdown yet. And the way that our political landscape is currently, I don't know that we would, even if it was warranted.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a whole other set of anxieties.
Yeah, totally.
I don't think it's going to happen the same way twice. Like, I don't think we're going to get another 96 days in lockdown, but I hope that in the future, I feel like something simple, like saying, I think I'm going to go on vacation, or I think I'm going to go have dinner with friends, doesn't feel so much like leaping empty-handed into the void, and you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I definitely used to take for granted that everything was probably fine. Tomorrow was probably going to happen, and probably it's okay to make plans in the far future. I don't feel that way anymore.
And are you somebody that kind of relied on certainty in your life before? Was that something that was particularly important to you, to know what was going to happen?
Yes, especially at my job, because of being a small business owner, I think we always kind of strive for, like, we like the excitement. Clearly, we're good at living on the edge, or we wouldn't do this for a living. We'd be in cubicles with, pensions. But I am kind of a control freak, and I really needed to know that I had control of my schedule, that I had control of at least some part of my life. Like, yes, I could get hit by a bus on the freeway, but other than that, I'm generally in control of my own future. And that's a loss. Like, that's a part of me, that kind of confidence and fearlessness that, like, if I don't get hit by a comet or a bus, I'm probably in some kind of control of my future. I miss that version of my personality that I don't think is ever coming back.
It's I think it's going to take a while, isn't it? Before things even feel normal again. Even if they are normal again, it's going to take a while to accept it, I think. There's going to be an element of PTSD, I think. Like, seriously, I think. Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, because I struggled with saying that I had PTSD, or saying that this was traumatic. Like, I had a really close friend actually said to me, why are you acting like this was traumatic? What did you do? You went you went home for 3 months to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer with your kids. Like where was the trauma? And it's a different sort of trauma. Like
Totally.
I don't want to detract from the people who lost loved ones or jobs or homes, certainly. But I think all of us have lost something.
And I think you hit the nail on the head earlier on in the interview, where you were talking about just that constant high level of stress and anxiety that you're constantly aware the whole time, and humans don't work like that. We're not supposed to be having a high level of awareness all the time, and then that will have psychological, I'm not going to say it's going to be permanent damage or anything, but certainly it's going to give us difficulties for a while. I think a lot of people don't really realize that yet, but certainly I think you're right in thinking in terms of PTSD and that sort of thing, because it's going to give you a framework moving forward to help yourself get better again. Obviously, I'm not a therapist or anything; it's just my opinion. But you know, I think it's going to give you a really good framework and a good starting point to rebuild your life again afterwards. But yeah, so I guess my last question would be, with hindsight, what thoughts or advice would you give yourself from 2 years ago?
I think I was so concerned with work and what was happening with the company and what was happening financially. The advice I would give myself is that under no other circumstances would I have gotten 96 consecutive days to spend with my husband and my kids. You know, like I said, my kids are older. It's been a long time since I've had that super intensive parenting experience, and to have my whole family together under one roof and navigate our days together as a group, that hadn't happened since our kids were really little. And so I experienced it on some level, and if I'm grateful for one part of this, like I hate to say there's a silver lining because I just wish none of it had happened, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to spend that kind of intense time with my family that I wouldn't have had. I never would have taken so much time off of work under any other circumstances. So I would tell myself to really try to be more in the moment and trust that everything is probably okay. But if I could go back and tell myself that, I would never believe myself.
Yeah, well, because the thing is, it was not knowing that it was only going to last 96 days. Because once you start getting, you know, they say 2 weeks, so you get to 2 weeks and nothing's changed, and this going on, and there's literally on a daily basis they're telling you it's going to be another day, that you can't really enjoy that, can you? And then so if they were able to tell us, oh, it's going to be 3 months, we're going to lock down, and then after 3 months we're going to open up again. If they had been a bit more organized, then people wouldn't have these difficulties, and we could have had some, but you know, more people would have had nicer experiences, I think, you know, and feeling a little bit more settled.
Absolutely. I think if we could have said it's 96 days, enjoy the hell out of it. You know, I remember I had my birthday during lockdown in April, and I had one friend send me a taco kit from our local restaurant, and I had another friend send me a dozen cupcakes from the local bakery. Nice. And it was just like getting these deliveries and you know, having a little driveway party.
Yeah, that's cool.
Like friends that stayed in their car and thinking this is just the weirdest birthday.
Yeah.
But looking back, it was kind of cool.
And this is exactly what I was saying earlier on, actually, about how Americans do that kind of stuff. Like, you know, people just wouldn't do that here. You know, people like just step up. I mean, there was I saw a thing in the news. I can't remember where I saw it now, but there was this man who owned a donut shop, and his wife was really ill, and he couldn't go into hospital to look after her because he had to work and sell his donuts. And basically people in the town they sent somebody in the morning to buy all of his donuts so that he could spend the day in hospital with his wife. It's like, that just doesn't happen here. Like,
wow.
yeah. It's just
I do think one of the side effects of having kind of a scattershot government
Yeah.
is we definitely have this feeling that it's no one's coming to save us.
Yeah.
Um, I've heard stories of having a broader social safety net and things like universal health care, and it just doesn't occur to me or any of the other people that I know that the government will take care of us when something happens to us. And so, like, I know, you know, a lot of people say, like, oh, people are looking for a handout or whatever. Like, we're actually not. We actually don't believe anyone's coming to save us. Anyone's coming to help us.
Yeah.
And within our own communities, I think there's a lot of cohesiveness that came out of the pandemic, because we never expected assistance. You know, there was a little bit of assistance. There was a little bit of like there was better unemployment benefits, and you know, eventually there was, you know, some small grant assistance that came through to help businesses, thank goodness. But in general, I think we all kind of didn't expect anyone to help, and so we did what we could for each other.
Yeah. It kind of created that community spirit between people, because you end up needing the individual responsibility is on the people in the community, and then because you know that there's not going to be a crutch for those people unless your community does it. There's not going to be a greater force, for want of a better term, within that community to help people. Yeah, I think in terms of universal healthcare, there's pros and cons to it. If you ever want to have a chat about it sometime, we can have a good discussion about that, actually.
Ooh, I would love to, because
Yeah.
I've only heard good things about it, but I wonder if there's downside. Like, we just don't know. We fully, we have health insurance here, and we fully expect to go bankrupt and lose our homes if we get cancer or have a severe injury. Like, we just, it's very much like like the olden days, like you'd go out to sea and hope you didn't die, and if you had a good catch, you get to eat that night. It's kind of like that. Like, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna work, and I have health insurance that I pay a lot of money for, but if I fall off a ladder, I'm probably gonna lose my house and die bankrupt. Like, and that's just it's what we expect to happen, and that's not the experience of some of my colleagues in other countries, and that just blows my mind. Sometimes.
I think that there's a lot of kind of myths that go around, particularly even in Britain as well. People have a lot of false ideas about what the NHS is, how it's funded, and the efficiency of it. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the NHS. I'm so glad we have it. I just think there's a lot of improvements that need to be done which aren't addressed because we have all this blind faith in it, when we need a bit more of a realistic faith in it. And so I mean, I just think that'd be quite interesting actually to do a video on, is like, you know, an American and a British person talking about this, you know. So if you want to do that sometime, but
I would love to. We've gone through trying to navigate getting health insurance for our employees, and how difficult it is, and how incredibly expensive it is. And it's like we spend so much money trying to figure out how to give them health insurance, because employer provided health insurance you know, is cheaper than going out and buying it yourself. But then, like, we pay so much money, and they have to pay so much money too. And so, like, now someone making, you know, $20 an hour is making $15 an hour, which is hardly enough to live on. And they still have crap health insurance. So, like, it's anyway, I would love to to have more conversations about that. And I don't know if I'm the most qualified person to talk about US health insurance. I just have my own little personal experience.
Oh no, I think it's a good place to start, because, like, 'cause I used to work for NHS England as a health analyst, so I don't have like a flawless understanding, but I've got a pretty decent understanding of how the NHS works. And I just think it'd be interesting to have that conversation with you know, just a regular American, and your experiences of the health system, and then what the NHS would do in that position, and the flaws of the NHS, because people need to know those too.
I spent a few years between having to leave my parents' health insurance as a young adult and then getting married to my husband, it was a government job. And, you know, we're very grateful for his job and his union and his health insurance, because we are in a much better position than I think a lot of other Americans because of his union. But the kind of protections that he has from his job are getting less and less common. Like, it's really rare to have as many benefits as he has in his job. And it's partly because he's had his job for 30 years. And it's partly because a New York State school district still has some of those kind of old school benefits that you wouldn't get going into a private company today. So the whole reason why I've had the ability to go off and take risks and own my own company and, you know, do a thing where maybe I'll make money and maybe I won't, is because I haven't had to bring home a consistent income and consistent health insurance for my family. So if we didn't have one household member bringing home health insurance for everybody, I would never have been able to take the risks that I've taken to start a business and employ 8 people and try to give them a livelihood, because I would have to stay wherever my health insurance was or find another job that had health insurance. Like, it's such a driver here, you know.
And
it's
dental
really hard.
as well.
Yeah, no, and that's health insurance doesn't include dental coverage. And we have the opportunity to buy into a dental plan and an eye care plan, but then, like, you know, my son needed an ambulance, and that wasn't covered, you know. So, like, we have a $1,700 ambulance bill because he needed to go to the hospital, and that's we have really good health insurance, and that's what we're dealing with. So, like, if I fell and hurt myself, I would really consider whether or not I could get in my car and drive myself. Rather than call an ambulance. Whereas I feel like if I was in, I don't know, if I was in Canada, I would call an ambulance and not think about whether or not I can pay my mortgage this month. Like, and it's not that dire for us, but I know for a lot of people, it's like a $1,700 ambulance bill would be more than a minor annoyance. It would be like, can I eat this month?
Yes, a month's wages.
So health insurance is a real touchy subject here.
Totally. And I guess on that note.
Right. Well, thank you. This has been an incredible experience. I hope I was a good interviewee. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. I had a really good time, and it was very interesting, actually. It's given me a lot to think about in my other interviews going forward. Kind of things to ask people about, and totally with this grief stuff and the PTSD stuff. I think that's something I'm going to try and go into a bit more with people as well, and see if I can coax out their ideas on it as well. But yes, it's given me a thread to pull, basically.
Oh, well, wonderful. Yay. I'm glad I could help.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to keep making TikToks about it, because I'm not going to do the death doula work right now, because a lot of my government contracts are in public housing. And so I'm working with, I'm not going to go from one population that's generally uninsured and generally, you know, maybe more of a vector. We work with homeless people, you know, so I'm not going to go from a homeless shelter or a public housing where I might be exposed to virus and then go to a dying person's home where I could spread the virus. Like, that's just, but anyway, the TikTok channel has helped me feel like I'm doing something that matters. And especially when I was stuck in lockdown, it helped me feel like I was doing something that mattered, that was helping other people. And that's, I love that part. It doesn't matter how many followers I have, although more would be nice, but I'm not trying to do it to make money.
And I think that's certainly the best approach for TikTok. I mean, if you're doing serious content like that, you know, just go into it thinking, you know, somebody will pick it up, and even if one person just watches this video, that's going to have an effect on someone, I think. But so I always feel like I never know how to end conversations.
Yeah, no, I know, me neither, but thank you. It's been such a pleasure, and please stay in touch. I would love to have more conversations with you.
Totally. Excellent.
I look forward to watching all your other interviews.
Oh, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well.
Bye.
Bye.